Welcome back to Tocqueville Talks. I'm Brent Nelsen, director of the Tocqueville Center at Furman University, and I'm joined by my co-host, Beth Larive. Today we are sharing a conversation with Mark Amstutz, who was just with us here at the Tocqueville Center. He is a professor emeritus of political science at Wheaton College. And before he was an emeritus, he was my professor back in the 1970s and 1980s. He actually got me into the study of politics. I took an early course with him, an intro to world politics, I think it was an introduction to politics, actually. And I was so taken with the subject matter that I decided to major in it, and he became my advisor. So, Beth, sometimes you never get past your undergraduate years and the people you admired there. So it was my pleasure to invite him to Furman for his talk. Now, he's an accomplished scholar. He's published many, many books, including one that many people use in ethics classes in international politics called International Ethics. He's also written about evangelicals and American foreign policy, and he has a brand new book called Building World Order: How the Christian Faith Fosters Global Peace, Prosperity, and Justice. So he really works at this fault line between Christian moral conviction and the hard realities of global politics.
Yeah, and that's what we got to talk about. He explored his vocation and his calling and the responsibility of forming students like yourself for service in church and society. We discussed in this interview immigration, refugees, nuclear deterrence, humanitarian action, and the temptation to offer moral answers without understanding real-world complexity. And his challenge to us was clear: moral seriousness requires intellectual seriousness.
This is a conversation about faith under pressure and about what it takes to pursue the common good when the world refuses simple answers. So, Beth, here's our conversation with Mark Amstutz.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you first about your career looking back at Wheaton College and authoring books like International Ethics and Evangelicals and American Foreign Policy. Was there a particular moment or a mentor or an experience that you had that crystallized for you how the Christian faith and the hard realities of international relations can and must be held together?
Well, that's a complex question. I would simply say that I thought I was going to be a diplomat, and while I was completing my doctoral dissertation, I was asked to fill out a faculty application at Wheaton College, and for a number of reasons, I filled it out, and I got a contract to start teaching 15 months before I was done with my doctoral work. And so my wife and I said, well, let's go to Wheaton for 2 years and then we'll come back to Washington, D.C. And so once I started teaching, I liked what was happening, and we never returned to Washington, D.C. We stayed, and early on I got quite involved in institutional affairs, and I was chairman of the long-range planning committee for the college as a associate professor, and as a result of the work that my group did on long-range planning for the college, which was probably the most important thing, was that we focused on the mission of the undergraduate program. And as a result of that, I didn't know it at the time, but as a result of that, I got a calling of equipping young men and women to serve church and society worldwide. So my job was never just about scholarship. It was really about equipping young men and women to do what I would have done had I gone back to Washington, D.C. So it evolved over time, and I'll simply say that I've never viewed myself as a scholar. I viewed myself more as a professor focusing on students. But along the way, prodded by my wife, she said, if in the early 80s, Mark, if something were to happen and you were to leave, you publish nothing. So you need to write for an audience other than just your students. And so my first book was an introduction to politics based upon the basic class that I was teaching, and that was widely used. And then later on I did a book on evangelicals and foreign policy, and it just kept shifting. And in the late 80s I came under the influence of the power of case studies. And so that resulted in a book on ethics and international affairs, and that went through 6 editions. So anyway, I was always curious, and since I was a missionary kid and grew up in Latin America, I was always wanting to travel, go to different places, and it was the curiosity that led me to write in a variety of books that covered ethics and religion as it applied to international affairs.
So in your scholarship, if you could expand a little more, you've highlighted how Christian convictions have positively shaped U.S. foreign policy through missionary work and through faith-based humanitarian networks, through advocacy on issues like human trafficking, religious freedom. We talked about immigration at your talk last night. And so what I was wondering is these efforts, where have they succeeded in joining moral passion with political realism? And what common elements do the strongest examples of these have? And then are there people that you associate these? Are there people that you would point to that students could look at and say, like, oh, that's someone that we should emulate?
I think I don't want to suggest that Christians have somehow a unique role. I think the common good. There are Mormons, there are Catholics, there are secularists who identify with the needs to advance human dignity. The advantage of being a Christian, however, is that we have teachings and principles that can, in fact, infuse our provide impetus, you might say, to do the good work that has been historically done. It's not unique just to missionaries and Christians, but I think Christians have a unique opportunity to care for the least of these, to foster migration. There are some issues that are difficult. I think the problem of nuclear weapons, for example, I found very, very challenging. And to me, what was important was how should a Christian think about the possession of nuclear weapons, how to carry out deterrence, and in the event of nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union, could the United States actually use them? And so I don't think these are so. My interest was always how to encourage reflection about these issues. And what I found was that some academics, a lot of people in academia are really just focused on their theories, their concepts, and they're not grounded in the way of practical affairs. And so I thought that Karl Marx had it right, because the object was to make the world a tad better and to change. And so I got my inspiration partly from Scripture, partly from Christian thinking, but also from people who know a great deal about these issues, like nuclear weapons. I mean, I spent enormous amount of time reading on the theory of deterrence, spent enormous amount of time thinking about the law that governs immigration, both international law and domestic law. So it's hard for me to pinpoint resources, because it would vary from issue to issue, like climate change to the issue of how to deal with refugees. To me, it's an enormously important issue, and I think people of goodwill should be caring for and make that a priority.
Well, that's really interesting that you raised the issue of resources and how they change from topic to topic. Even that, as an observation, seems to get into a level of granularity that the public discourse often just shoots right past, blows right past that. So if we were to pick an issue, if you were to pick one issue, what sort of resources would you guide people to? I know I've heard this question from my own students is, well, I want to know more. I don't know where to look.
Well, I would start with you have to pick a problem. So if you don't focus on a problem, your energy is going to be distributed. So as I mentioned last night in my talk, I got interested in immigration. I knew nothing about immigration except that when a document is issued by the National Association of Evangelicals, it prodded me. I quite honestly, I got very upset that the NAE had issued a document that I thought was flawed in a fundamental way. In other words, why would this group of churches be saying what they're saying? And so what you then do is you just focus on, I read an enormous number of books, the law, and then you develop what I would call just a general competence about understanding the nature of the problem. The problem with public policy is that people don't want to develop competence on these issues, and they want to solve the problem. Welcome the stranger. Professor Amstutz, are you for peace? I mean, so if you're a pacifist, a nuclear pacifist or a pacifist, and you're dealing with this problem of blowing up the world, it can be very disheartening to just focus on a very simplistic approach. So I guess if anything, what I've tried to over the years to encourage my students is, if you're going to talk morally about something, make sure that you understand the ethics well and that you understand the nature of the problem well.
So last night you also mentioned that your personal connection to one aspect of immigration, which was helping a family of Afghan legal immigrants, refugees.
Yes.
And maybe you could, the research side of how to help liberal arts students who might be at the college level and feeling a Christian calling similar to you, to engage in public life with an awareness of and on the basis of these principles to some degree. What are the kinds of steps that they could take to cultivate the virtues that might be useful in pursuing this research?
In order to address any kind of specific issue, whether it's poverty, migration, nuclear weapons, you have to get your feet grounded. So, for example, my work with refugees themselves is a way of tangibly witnessing the challenges that they face, and so it's been very helpful to me. Now, in writing the book Just Immigration, I didn't spend time interviewing migrants themselves. I just had more than enough theological and political and practical. But I would say that to any young person who's a college student who's looking to make the world a tad better, don't think of just your gifts and abilities and interests, but rather find a problem, whether it's climate change, whether it's environmental concerns, whether it's how to deal with refugees, and try to meet a refugee. So my experience, I was a Naval Reserve officer, and my experience in the Navy serving in the Pentagon and embassies as an attaché was enormously helpful in bringing me closer to decision makers on this. Abstract theology and abstract political thought is important, but it's not sufficient. Let me just also say that when I graduated from college, I spoke at a church, and the president of Ford Motor Company was present in this church service on a Sunday evening, and he walked up to me later on and he said, "Mark, thank you very much about your reflections on what you want to do with your life." He said, "I just have one comment." He said, "As president of Ford Motor Company," he said, "I hire a lot of MBAs and engineers." And he said, "What matters is not your educational pedigree. It's not what you know theoretically. Is can you do the work?" And he said, "Mark, in the Christian faith, it's not what you know theologically and biblically. It's how do you live your life every day." And I would have to say that I've tried to bring that focus. That's why I told a lot of examples and stories in my teaching over the years.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's fascinating food for thought.
Okay.
And, I appreciate your reflections on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Tocqueville Talks. This episode was produced by Audrey Enghauser. Lucy Southwell provided administrative support. The theme music is called "The Girl I Left Behind Me," a popular folk song in early 19th century America, here performed by Jacob Taylor Armerding. To learn more about our lecture series and events, our Tocqueville and Beaumont Fellows programs for undergraduates, and to listen to episodes, watch event recordings, or support our work, search on Google for the Tocqueville Center at Furman University. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Tocqueville Talks on all your favorite listening services. And visit our YouTube channel for full recordings of past events and episodes. Until next time, goodbye.